The quiet corner of memory. The San Francisco evening settled in at a cool 54 degrees Fahrenheit, the fog rolling off the bay in soft waves that blurred the city's edges as Elon Musk slipped out the back door of the San Francisco Convention Center. The tech conference had been a relentless 3-day grind. Cameras flashing like fireflies, handshakes that felt more like transactions, and a barrage of questions about Mars colonization, Tesla's latest battery breakthroughs, and the ever-looming shadow of AI. His temples throbbed, his eyes burned from the glare of spotlights, and all he wanted was a sliver of peace. 15 minutes to breathe, maybe sip a coffee, before his driver whisked him back to the Fairmont Hotel atop Nob Hill. 15 minutes, he muttered to his security guard, Tom, a burly man with a decade of loyalty etched into his quiet demeanor. Tom scanned the street, his gaze landing on a small cafe across the road, its faded sign reading Bayview Brew in peeling letters. "That place looks quiet enough, sir," he said, nodding toward the unassuming storefront. Elon crossed the street, his sneakers scuffing against the damp pavement. Hands shoved deep into the pockets of his black hoodie. A rare attempt at blending in. The air carried a salty tang from the bay, mingling with the faint hum of traffic on Market Street, a few blocks away. He pushed open the cafe door, and a soft bell jingled overhead, its chime swallowed by the warm hush inside. The scent of brewed coffee and fresh pastries hit him like a gentle wave, a stark contrast to the sterile buzz of the conference halls. The place was nearly deserted. Just 2 college kids hunched over laptops near the counter, their screens casting blue glows on their faces, and an old man by the window, turning the pages of a San Francisco Chronicle with deliberate care. The barista, a young woman with a nose ring and a bored expression, barely looked up as Elon ordered a black coffee, her fingers tapping the register with mechanical precision. He paid with a crumpled $5 bill from his pocket, no card, no fuss, and took the steaming cup to a corner table, tucked away from the streetlights streaming through the wide windows. It was a spot he chose instinctively, a vantage point where he could see the room without being seen, a habit forged from years of dodging paparazzi and curious stares. He sank into the wooden chair, its edges worn smooth by countless patrons, and let the warmth of the coffee seep into his hands. The conference had been a circus, executives in $1,000 suits pitching deals, reporters fishing for headlines, fans thrusting phones in his face for selfies. He'd smiled through it all, answered with calculated quips, but now, in this quiet nook, he could let the mask slip, even if just for a moment. He took a sip, the bitter heat grounding him, and let his gaze drift across the cafe, taking in the faded posters of Golden Gate Bridge sunsets and the chipped formica tables that whispered of better days. That's when he saw her. An elderly woman in a blue and white uniform moved slowly between the tables, wiping them down with a damp rag. Her silver hair was pulled into a tight bun, strands escaping like wisps of cloud, and her shoulders curved inward, as if the years had pressed them down with a gentle but unrelenting hand. She was small, barely reaching 5 feet, her frame swallowed by the oversized uniform that hung loose around her thin arms. Her hands, spotted with age, knuckles swollen and red, worked with a slow, deliberate rhythm, scrubbing at a stubborn spot on a table near the counter. Something about the way her right wrist twisted, a subtle quirk as she pressed the rag harder, caught Elon's eye like a snag in the fabric of memory. He leaned forward, the coffee cup forgotten in his hands, squinting through the soft light filtering from the overhead bulbs. It can't be, he thought, his mind resisting the pull even as his heart began to race. He watched her move to the next table, her steps measured, her focus unbroken despite the faint tremble in her fingers. The cafe's hum faded, the clatter of the barista's espresso machine, the rustle of the old man's newspaper, the low murmur of the students' voices. All of it dissolved as Elon's attention narrowed to her. There was something familiar in the careful way she worked, a quiet purpose he couldn't place but couldn't shake. She turned slightly, and the profile of her face came into view. High cheekbones, a gentle slope to her nose, framed by the silver hair that gleamed faintly under the lights. His breath hitched, a sharp intake that startled him. "Jolie?" The name slipped out, a whisper too soft to carry. but it landed in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. She didn't hear, her rag still tracing slow circles on the table, her back to him now. But Elon knew those features, that silhouette, etched into his memory from a time when the world was smaller, simpler, and Pretoria's dusty streets were his universe. He set the coffee down, the cup clinking faintly against the table, and stood, his legs moving before his mind could catch up. His heart pounded, a rhythm that echoed back to childhood summers, to a kitchen table littered with paper planes and a voice that turned his wild ideas into something real. "Jolie Vega," he said, louder this time, his voice cutting through the cafe's stillness as he stepped closer. She paused, the rag hovering mid-motion, and turned. Confusion creased her weathered face, her brow furrowing as she squinted up at him. "Yes? Do I know you, sir?" Her voice was thin, worn by years, but it carried that familiar lilt. Spanish woven into English, a melody from decades past that tugged at the edges of his soul. Up close, he saw the toll of time etched into her skin. Deep lines fanning out from her eyes and mouth, hands rough and red from labor, a slight tremor as she gripped the rag. Her uniform was threadbare at the cuffs, the blue faded to a dull gray, and her apron hung crooked, tied with a knot that spoke of haste rather than care. But those eyes, warm, brown, steady as ever, pierced through the years, unchanged despite the weight of them. "It's me," he said, his voice softening to a near whisper. Elon Musk. From Pretoria. Jolie's eyes widened, the rag slipping from her grasp to land with a soft plop on the floor. "Ellie," she breathed, the nickname she'd given him trembling on her lips like a secret unearthed. Her hand reached out, halting just short of his face, as if afraid he'd vanish under her touch. "My little Ellie? Is it really you?" Her accent thickened, the Spanish inflection curling around the words like a familiar song. Elon nodded, his throat tightening until he could barely speak. "It's me, Jolie." In that moment, he wasn't the billionaire who just addressed a room of 2,000 tech enthusiasts. He was 6 again, sprawled on his mother's kitchen floor in Pretoria, South Africa, while Jolie taught him to fold paper airplanes that soared 20 feet across the yard. She'd been his nanny, his sanctuary, the one who'd listened when he babbled about rockets piercing the sky, who'd bandaged his scraped knees after he crashed a makeshift cart cobbled from wood and bicycle parts. She'd packed his lunch with apple slices and peanut butter sandwiches, slipped him extra cookies when his mother wasn't looking, and sat with him through thunderstorms, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder until he fell asleep. Now, here she was, 85 years old, wiping tables in a San Francisco cafe for minimum wage, while he sat atop a fortune that could buy entire city blocks. "You grew up so tall," she said, her voice quivering with emotion. She smiled, a fragile, proud curve that lit her face despite the exhaustion etched into it. "I see you on the television sometimes. Space rockets, electric cars, just like you always said you would." Her eyes shimmered, a mix of joy and disbelief, as she took him in, her gaze lingering on his face as if mapping the boy she'd known onto the man before her. "What are you doing here, Jolie?" Elon asked, his voice sharper than he intended as he glanced around the cafe, its chipped tables, its worn linoleum floor, the faint hum of a refrigerator that sounded like it hadn't been serviced since the Reagan years. "You must be 85 last month," she finished for him, bending slowly to retrieve her rag. Her knees creaked audibly, and Elon moved faster, snatching it from the floor and pressing it into her hand. "But why are you working at a cafe?" The question came out blunt, almost accusatory, laced with a disbelief he couldn't mask. Her chin lifted, a flicker of pride flashing in her eyes despite the weariness. "Life happens, Nino," she said, using the affectionate Spanish term she'd called him as a child. "I work because I must. The bills don't pay themselves." Her voice was steady, but there was a weight to it, a quiet resolve that spoke of years spent fighting to stand on her own. A loud voice cut through from behind the counter, sharp and impatient. "Jolie, tables 4 and 6 need clearing." The manager, a wiry man with a clipboard and a permanent scowl, didn't even glance up from his inventory list. "One moment, Mr. Davis," she called back, her tone suddenly heavy with fatigue. She turned to Elon, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture that felt both familiar and fleeting. "You should sit down. These old bones keep moving, or they stop altogether." She smiled again, a faint echo of the warmth she'd once radiated, but he saw the exhaustion beneath it. The way she leaned slightly on the table for support, the wince that crossed her face as she shifted her weight. "Can we talk after your shift?" Elon asked, his voice softening, urgency creeping in. "Maybe. I finish at 8, she said, glancing at the big round clock on the wall, its hands ticking towards 7:45 p.m. "Then I catch the bus to my night job." "Night job?" Elon's voice cracked, disbelief spilling over. "You work 2 jobs?" "Night cleaning at the office buildings on Market Street," she said, her tone matter-of-fact, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "It pays better than daytime work, $10 an hour instead of $8. Elon ran a hand through his hair, his mind reeling as if he'd been hit by a sudden gust off the bay. The woman who'd taught him to count the stars through his bedroom window during Pretoria's summer storms, who'd stayed up late to rebuild a model rocket after his father's temper had shattered it, was scrubbing floors at 85 while he flew private jets and banked billions. "Jolie, Jolie, those tables!" The manager barked again, his voice slicing through the air like a whip. "I have to go," she said, giving his arm a quick squeeze, her fingers frail but firm against his sleeve. "You look good, Nino. Your mother would be proud." Before he could respond, she shuffled away, her steps slow but determined, wincing as she bent to pick up a tray of dirty dishes. Coffee mugs stained with lipstick, plates scattered with crumbs. Elon stood frozen, watching her disappear into the rhythm of her work. His chest tightened, a mix of shock and something deeper. Guilt, maybe, or a longing he couldn't name. Tom approached, his voice low. "Sir, your car's waiting." Elon nodded, barely hearing him, his eyes still on Jolie as she wiped another table, her back to him now. He pulled out his wallet and tucked a $100 bill under his coffee cup, a gesture that felt hollow, a drop in the ocean of what he could do. "We need to change plans," he told Tom as they stepped outside, the fog wrapping around them like a shroud. "I want everything on this cafe. Who owns it? Her shift schedules, her address. Get it to me tonight." Tom scribbled notes on his phone, unfazed by the urgency. Elon took one last look through the cafe window. Jolie was busy with another table, her silver hair catching the light, her presence as invisible to the room as it had been vital to his childhood. The contrast hit him like a punch. His sleek Tesla waited curbside, a $100,000 machine purring silently, while she'd ride a $2 bus to scrub floors for pennies. "This isn't right," he whispered, sliding into the back seat. As the car pulled away, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white, but his mind was elsewhere. Back in Pretoria, back with Jolie, and forward to a future he'd only begun to imagine. This wasn't just a reunion. It was the start of something he couldn't yet define. The weight of 2 worlds. The fog thickened around the sleek black Tesla Model S as it glided away from the Bayview Brew Cafe, its headlights cutting through the San Francisco night like twin beams of purpose. Inside, Elon Musk sat in the back seat, the $100 bill he'd left under his coffee cup still burning in his mind. A gesture that felt as inadequate as tossing a pebble into the Pacific. The temperature had dipped to 52 degrees Celsius, the city's damp chill seeping through the car's tinted windows. But Elon barely noticed. His thoughts were locked on Jolie, the 85-year-old woman he'd just left behind, her silver hair catching the cafe's dim light as she shuffled between tables with arthritic hands. The image clashed violently with the world he'd built, a world of private jets, sprawling factories, and a net worth that could buy entire neighborhoods along the Bay Area's coast. Tom, his security guard, sat up front with the driver, already tapping out messages on his phone to gather the intel Elon had demanded. Details on the cafe, Jolie's shifts, her address. The car hummed silently, a $100,000 marvel of engineering, winding through the city's steep streets toward the Fairmont Hotel, 2 miles uphill. Elon stared out the window, the blurred lights of Nob Hill flickering past like stars he'd once counted with Jolie on Pretoria's warm summer nights. "This isn't right," he'd whispered as they'd pulled away, And now those words looped in his head, growing louder with each passing block. How had it come to this? How had the woman who'd shaped his earliest dreams, his paper planes, his rocket sketches, ended up scrubbing floors for $10 an hour while he sat atop a fortune that Forbes pegged at $200 billion? Back in the cafe, Jolie had moved with a quiet dignity that belied her exhaustion, her blue and white uniform hanging loose on her frail frame as she cleared tables 4 and 6 under Mr. Davis's barked orders. Elon could still see her wincing as she lifted the tray of dirty dishes, coffee mugs with lipstick stains, plates littered with crumbs, her knuckles red and swollen from years of labor. She'd squeezed his arm with those same hands, frail but firm, and said, "You look good, Nino. Your mother would be proud," before disappearing into her work. That touch, that voice, soft, lilting with Spanish warmth, had yanked him back 40 years to a Pretoria kitchen where she'd taught him to fold paper airplanes that soared 20 feet across the yard. She'd been his nanny then, his steady hand through his parents' storms, his dreamer's muse when he'd babbled about rockets piercing the sky. Now she was a shadow in a cafe, invisible to everyone but him, while he'd become a name that echoed across the globe. The Tesla pulled into the Fairmont Circular Drive, its marble facade glowing under discreet floodlights. Elon stepped out, the night air biting at his face, and waved Tom off as he strode through the lobby, past the polished brass and plush armchairs, to the elevator. His suite on the 20th floor was a sprawling 1,500 square feet of luxury. Hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city's twinkling expanse, a king-sized bed with sheets that cost more than Jolie's monthly rent. He dropped onto the edge of that bed, the $5,000 mattress barely registering under his weight, and rubbed his tired eyes, still seeing her. Jolie wiping tables at 85 while he'd just spent 3 days pitching visions of interstellar travel to men in $1,000 suits. He stood and paced to the windows, the city lights stretching out like a galaxy he'd dreamed of conquering since childhood. That dream had started with her, Jolie kneeling beside him in the garden, adjusting the fins on a model rocket he'd built at 7 from scrap wood and glue. "Balance, Nino," she'd said, her accent curling around the words. "Without balance, even the strongest rocket falls." He still used that phrase with his SpaceX engineers, a mantra that had launched Falcon rockets into orbit and payloads to the International Space Station. She'd taught him to turn failure into lessons too, rebuilding his projects after his father's temper shattered them, asking, "What can we learn from this?" That question had driven him through PayPal's rocky early days, Tesla's near bankruptcies, every impossible venture that now defined his empire. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, an email from his private investigator, subject: "Preliminary info on J. Vega." Elon opened it, the screen's glow casting sharp shadows across his face. Jolie Vega, age 85, immigrated to U.S. 30 years ago. Current address: 1427 Elm Street, Oakland, CA. Employment: cafe worker, Bayview Brew, $8 30 hours teachers lash. WK, night cleaner, Market Street offices. $10 25 hours lash suruk. No criminal record. Bank balance, 400 dazel. No retirement fund. He stared at the numbers, his stomach twisting. She worked 55 hours a week, more than most full-time jobs, for less than $25,000 a year, while he'd spent that much on a single dinner with investors last month at the French Laundry, 40 miles north in Napa Valley. How is this possible? He muttered, scrolling further. Her address was in a rundown part of Oakland, 12 miles east. A gray apartment complex with peeling paint and barred windows, according to the attached photo. He pictured her there, climbing stairs with those creaking knees, heating soup on a hot plate because the stove was broken, counting out $2 for the bus to Market Street each night. Meanwhile, his Palo Alto estate sprawled across 47 acres, with a garage full of Teslas and a view of the Santa Cruz Mountains worth $100 million alone. The contrast was dizzying, a chasm wider than the 9,000 miles between Pretoria and San Francisco. He dropped the phone and paced again, memories flooding back like a tide he couldn't hold. Jolie had arrived in 1979 when he was 4, a small suitcase in hand and a smile that cut through the chaos of his parents' crumbling marriage. "This is Miss Vega," his mother had said, "eh? She'll care for you and your brother." She'd knelt to his level, no perfume, no baby talk, and asked, "Do you like stories, Nino?" When he nodded, she'd promised tales in English and Spanish, sealing a bond that lasted 6 years. She'd brought him apple slices when he hid with his books, taught him the Southern Cross, find it when you're lost, and patched his bloody nose after a bully's punch, saying, "You have a special mind, Ellie. They'll see it someday." At 10, she'd vanished. No goodbye, just his mother's tight-lipped adult business. He'd waited by the window for weeks, then buried her in memory. Until tonight. Now, the disparity hit harder than any conference spotlight. While he'd built SpaceX in a 300,000 square foot facility in Hawthorne, launching rockets that cost $60 million apiece, Jolie had scrubbed floors in Oakland office towers, her hands raw from bleach and hot water. While he'd flown to New York on a $70 million Gulfstream G650, dining on caviar at 40,000 feet, she'd ridden the BART for $2.50 sahs, her supper a $1 can of soup from a corner store. While he'd addressed crowds of 2,000 at $500 a ticket events, she'd worked 55-hour weeks for wages that wouldn't cover a single night in his Fairmont suite. Elon stopped pacing, his reflection staring back from the window. A man in a $200 hoodie who'd just left a $100 tip for a woman who'd shaped his billion-dollar dreams. He thought of her wincing as she lifted that tray, her night job stretching into the early hours, her body bent under a load he could erase with a fraction of his wealth. He'd spent $1 billion on Tesla's Gigafactory in Nevada, 5 million square feet of cutting-edge tech, while Jolie's life fit into a 400-square-foot apartment with a leaky roof. The numbers didn't just contrast, they screamed. He grabbed his phone and called his investigator. "I need more. Tonight. Her health, her history, everything." Hanging up, he sank into a leather chair, its $3,000 price tag mocking him. He'd always prided himself on solving big problems. Electric cars to fight climate change, rockets to colonize Mars. But this felt bigger, more personal. Jolie had given him the tools to dream. Balance, resilience, curiosity. She'd stayed up with him during Pretoria's 80-degree summer nights, counting stars when his parents' fights kept him awake, her voice a lifeline. Now, she was counting hours, 55 a week, to pay a $600 rent check, while he counted billions. His laptop chimed, an email from his assistant. Acquisitions update. Cafe owner open to $500K offer. Cleaning company resisting. Wants 1.2. He'd told his team to buy both places after leaving the cafe, a snap decision to raise wages and benefits, especially for seniors like Jolie. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. He pictured her on that bus, the 12-mile ride from San Francisco to Oakland, her uniform damp from a long shift, her hands aching as she gripped the rail. He'd flown 12 miles in his jet in under 10 minutes last week. Her commute took an hour each way twice a day. Another memory surfaced. Jolie at his 8th birthday, slipping him an extra slice of cake when his mother wasn't looking, her wink a silent pact. She'd been his conspirator, his cheerleader, while he'd grown into a man who could spend $8 million on a hypercar without blinking. She'd worked 2 jobs, $8 daytime, $10 nights, while he'd banked $165 million from PayPal's sale alone, back when she was likely caregiving in Sacramento for $5 an hour. The gap wasn't just money, it was time, opportunity, a life she'd poured into others while he'd built towers of wealth. He stood, restless, and walked to the minibar, stocked with $50 bottles of wine he wouldn't touch. Jolie's fridge probably held 3 milk and day-old bread, if that. He thought of her pride. I work because I must. And the exhaustion in her eyes, a mirror to his own after the conference, but hers born of survival, not ambition. He'd left Pretoria at 17, chasing a future she'd helped him imagine, while she'd landed in Oakland at 55, chasing rent. He'd launched Starlink satellites, $1 billion for 4,000 units, while she'd scrubbed floors under fluorescent lights, her hands a testament to a struggle he'd never known. His phone buzzed again. Tom. Address confirmed. 1.27 Elm St. Oakland. Shift ends 8 p.m. Night job 10 p.m. 2 a.m. Elon checked the time. 9:15 p.m. She'd be on that bus soon, heading 12 miles east to scrub desks while he sat in a suite with a $500 a night view. He texted his driver. Meet me downstairs, now. He couldn't wait for reports or plans. He needed to see her again, to bridge this chasm with more than a $100 bill. The contrast wasn't just stark, it was a call, a debt he hadn't known he owed until tonight.